On our panel is Martin Jack. He's with Barcoding. We got Chris Rossi at the end with SCH Group, and Bruce Stubbs in the middle with Honeywell. Why don't you guys go ahead and start with Chris and give everybody just a quick background of yourself.
Hi, good morning. So I'm Chris Rossi with SCH Group, and I am a principal in our technology advisory practice. What I do and what my practice does is we work with manufacturers, distributors, field service companies on a broad array of sort of IT management technology initiatives. A great deal of what we do is help the senior management team figure out what are they trying to do, where are they trying to go, and then help them get there. That can take on many different roles. So we end up working in ERP, mobile, and a large number of different cloud initiatives as the whole cloud space has really shifted the way people think of things. So that's a short version of what we do. Thank you.
And Bruce?
Good morning. I'm Bruce Stubbs from Honeywell. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Marketing. And my role is really to help provide internal strategic direction within the organization from an industry background and an industry direction standpoint, as well as help with our partner community as well and be a part of their ongoing strategies and innovation.
And Martin.
Martin Jack. I'm with Barcoding Incorporated. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Barcoding. And many of our customers today here, as well as the customers that are not here, they utilize Android devices and the cloud. So we're looking forward to discussing Android and the cloud migration today.
Great. Okay, so with that, let's first question. And you can look at it from a technical side, as well as let's take a look at what your customers, the non-technical, the users think as well. And so the question is, how does the evolution of cloud platforms change the way that our customers should be thinking about that technology? And we can start with Chris.
Okay. I think the first thing that you have to do when you look at cloud is sort of step back and understand that we've been in what I call the client-server era for since really the early 90s. And that's what most of the technology that's deployed today is based on. That's what most of the IT professionals that are employed at your companies have lived through and are part of. And we're in the middle of what is a dramatic shift to a very different structure. True cloud is fundamentally different than client-server. And so I think you have to start with understanding that you're in a paradigm shift, and you have to step back and try to rethink how is everything going to work when it's fundamentally different. Right now, a lot of folks will take a hybrid state. They'll do a little of this and a little of that. And what they're doing is actually creating a more complex hybrid structure instead of actually decreasing complexity. So that's usually where I start, is try to have that conversation.
And Martin, anything you would add to that?
No, I'll just add to what Chris is saying. I think what we've seen in today's cloud is a lot of interoperability and the focus on not only sharing data like we have in the past, but we are starting to share data and collaborate with the data. We're actually using the data to create more user-focused applications. So we're also seeing that the focus is more on user-defined or user, where the focus is on user-centered design, so that the applications we're creating, we're actually utilizing that cloud data that we are receiving from other applications, other systems, and we're collaborating with the data, and we're creating smarter systems. So I think with the cloud that we have today, some say Web 2.0, we're actually seeing the data being used in a way that was never used before. The cloud version in the past really was focused on really just presenting the data to us. Today, we're actually utilizing the data and creating much richer applications.
Very cool. Bruce, anything you've got to add as you talk to folks?
Yeah, and a lot of my views are going to be a little bit more operational than technical, but how I look at it is the cloud is providing accessibility and visibility to a lot of that data. So we have the term out there, big data, and everybody makes a big deal about big data. But data's been existing in our systems for a long time. It's always been there. It's just the accessibility to it in real time, which makes it actionable, or in some actionable fashion too. It has to be in a format to be able to use. So What that's allowing us to do is actually take that data and utilize it in not just reactive manners like we have in the past. If you think of cold chain, and a cold chain example, there was data that you would be able to capture when something like frozen or perishable food arrived at a distribution center dock. That was all reactive, right? Because it was data you're capturing at that moment in time. Then there was an intermediate step where there was sensors being used in that journey, which still made it a capture in time though, because that sensor gathered that data, but it was all captured at once at the end, so everything was still reactive. Now we can be more proactive or even predictive with this data and analytics, because with the cloud, I've enabled all that sensor type data to be pushed out through a gateway in real time so that people can monitor what's happening in real time and know that 2 days in advance that something happened with the condition of something shipped, whether it's pharmaceuticals or perishables, in the interim or during that shipment. So now I can be more predictive with it at the end. So the cloud is really enabling us to be more predictive and proactive with information, because the data's always existed.
Right. I think that's really consistent there, is the cloud is allowing us to share data amongst not only our own organization, but also amongst our trading partners. Okay, great. Second question. How do customer expectations affect the current state of mobile computer operating systems? So this is really kind of focused towards Android. And why don't we start with Martin?
So obviously we have a Android and iOS are the two primary platforms out there. And what we're seeing, there are a lot of consumer type features that we are now adapting in our supply chain industry. And I think when we think about expectations, today we actually have features that we're not using today in the supply chain that I think we are prime and ready to use. You think of it as an example, someone that's working in a warehouse that is using an Android device. Today we can actually have the ability for that person to log into that device using biometrics. We have the ability for that person to speak to the device and ask for directions of what they're about to pick. All within the OS, we have the ability to help direct that person using BLE, right, Bluetooth Low Energy. And when we get to where we're going, we can actually scan, and we can also validate that we're picking the right item using object recognition, right? So there are a lot of features that actually supports the devices today that are built into the operating system that I believe will start being moved over into our vertical, the supply chain vertical. So I think we're a lot closer than we think. And I think the expectations are being forced on us by the consumers that are actually using the consumer-grade devices, longing for these type of features within our industry.
Great. And Bruce?
Well, I completely agree. I think what it's allowing us to do is to be able to capture richer data, doing more things at the point of process. So it's enabling the actual worker at the point of process to do more at that point of process versus having to go back, do things on the laptop, come back out. Even if it's just taking a picture of damage, the devices have changed and the capabilities have allowed people to do more at that point of process. And that is making the operations more efficient.
Great. And Chris, you have anything to add?
Yes, I'll add. I think what's impressive on the mobile device side is what the applications can do. And mobile is a very modern architecture comparatively. The challenge I deal with all the time is that we can get that data back from the mobile, and the mobile itself may be working very well within a narrow scope. But getting that data back into your back-end systems and then actioning from that is actually very problematic, since most organizations have back-end systems that could be 10, 20 years old with a very inflexible architecture and just simply the inability to do that. So when I think about rising customer expectations, the customers are going, well, why can't you tell me on the fly proactively X, Y, or Z? And when you try to dig into that, it's not a limitation on the mobile device. It's how do I get that data back into my system, know what to do, and intelligently then action from that. And that actually is sort of a big transition we're into. In some ways, the mobile are ahead of what quite a bit ahead of what many of the back-end systems could handle. So that transition is sort of in full flight. I think the next 5, 6, 7 years, we're going to see a dramatic movement on getting the back-end systems to match up with that mobile technology. You can already do today, and the consumer is saying, I can do this, I can pull up an app, and it can immediately do this. Why can't I get you, my vendor, to help me make this happen faster, quicker, cheaper on my part? So we'll see how that goes.
And that's a really good point, as we, as consumers, are used to instant access and pulling down new apps every day. Once you get in your corporate environment, it's not that simple any longer. There's a lot of built-in restrictions. And so as you guys look to invest in new technologies and cloud computing, you got to think about it from front to back, from mobile to server, right? So really good input, guys. Question number 3. What trends are you seeing in your customers' adoption of the cloud and mobile computing? And let's start with Bruce for that one.
Okay. From a mobile computing trend standpoint, what we're seeing is people still want flexibility. They want the device or the total solution, because I always like to say that, you know, without the software background, then the mobile device is really, in some ways, a paperweight, right? Because it takes the software to drive the processes. However, without the mobile device and the data capture systems, then software is paper-driven. So there's a relationship that has to exist there. But what the people are really looking for still is flexibility in those systems. So there's still people that want keys on devices, because there's hotkeys with those systems that they want to be able to interact with and speed up those processes. Some people want icons on the screen so that they can go and, you know, which Android in the cloud is now providing, to be able to go and access different applications and move from application to application without scrolling through a lot of screens or stopping a session, starting a session, and so forth. And then there's the people that don't want the screen at all. There's a lot of movement. You know, over 80% of the people that I talk to on a daily basis are looking to move to some type of hands-free type of solution, where I don't have to actually look at the screen. I can still use data capture, scanning technologies, but use it in a fashion that I'm not impeding my productivity. So whether that is wearables paired with voice, paired with vision, whatever that may be, some of the, you know, the newer technologies, but a lot of people are looking to move away from something, you know, that I actually have to hold in my hand and actually read off of a screen.
Right. And Chris, I'm sure you run into all kinds of interesting things with the folks you talk to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very broad space right now. I find it seems to be all kinds of extremes. You've got, you know, okay, I want wearables, which is sort of one side of the spectrum, and then I have clients who haven't implemented barcoding yet.
Right.
So I find it fascinating what a broad range there is on this. I don't know that I have any great wisdom beyond what Bruce said. I just think it's a space that's very wide open and subject to each company figuring out, well, what do I need to do to utilize these in a way that makes sense for the industry or that I am in, that'll create competitive advantage. And that answer varies for every single entity, both for industry reasons, but also for cultural reasons. And so I think that's going to be an evolution or revolution as this happens. And I think it's happening. What I do think is happening is it's happening very fast. You know, a lot of these things have been really static for a long time, but we're in a period of rapid change, and rapid change in where it's actually actionable for manufacturers, for distributors. It's not some tech company in the middle of Silicon Valley. It's actually on the floor, actionable technology, whether it's wearable or whatever it is, that is going to make a difference and actually drops a lot of money to the bottom line.
Yeah.
You know, just to add to what Chris is saying, I think one of the trends that we're seeing, you know, traditionally in our space, we saw a lot of data collection on the devices, right? The traditional analytics, as we would call it, on devices, whether it's the battery status and wireless status. I think what we're starting to see now as a new trend is the gathering of data on behavioral actions of the users. So we're starting to see smart applications, going back to my you know, the apps are being smarter and being designed for the user to have control of the apps. So now we're starting to monitor how users are using the apps. So we're collecting that information and we're tying that into the devices. So we actually combining the two data points to form trends in how the apps are being used, on how the devices are being used, at what point the features are being turned on. So I think what we're starting to see is the combination of behavioral data points being captured along with the device data points that are, again, lead into much smarter apps.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think, for us that have been in the industry for a long time and have seen, DOS devices and Windows devices and now Android and iOS devices, one thing to really consider is, and leveraging off what we heard just earlier this morning with the keynote, is you got to get into that 3D mindset in order to really not just replace what you're doing today with the new technology that does the same thing, but really to look at the new technology and figure out, is there a better way we can do it or enhance what we have been doing historically. Good input, guys. Question number 4. What should a CIO or IT leader consider when they begin to create a strategy to transition to cloud or mobile computing? Well, let's start with Martin.
Okay, so I think, as a CTO, one of the things I talk a lot about, and I was just joking with Jack, and I was like, that's in the audience right now, I like to use the term verification validation, and we were recently in a presentation where I used that term, and it's something that I've stuck with all the way through my college years to now in my profession. And I think a lot of times enough effort isn't put into both verification and validation, and folks are probably wondering what's the difference. So verification is more of doing testing or verifying that what you're saying, what you are installing is actually going to be something that's going to work. But validating it actually means putting it at its test, So if you install any new cloud-based backend that talks to an Android device, the verification is there. Android can talk to the cloud, and we know it can actually function, but we need to actually validate what we are actually installing. We need to validate that it can scale, validate that it can actually hold up against security issues. We need to validate that we can have dependencies built in. So I think a lot of times as you think about the cloud and Android, it's not enough to just think about how you're going to deploy these things. You need to have a validation process built in that you're going to check off as you deploy your new systems. So that's something I continue to focus on. There's a lot to talk about when you talk about verification and validation, but those are 2 steps that I believe anyone in this room should focus on as you deploy your systems.
And Chris, you live in the strategy world every day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I tend to come at it from a very broad perspective. So what I'm often asked to do is say, okay, here's our entire technology platform. How do we get from where we are today to a future state? And when we look at that in context of the cloud, it means some, if I'm trying to take someone from a pure on-prem state to a pure cloud state, I have to think about, what's my identity management strategy? What am I going to do about file shares? What is my core system? Is it a cloud solution, and is it going to handle that? Then when I get into like a specific application, an Android application, how is that then going to tie into that cloud architecture in a way that works, that's secure, and that I can continue to manage and develop over time? So it's sort of, you have to build this roadmap out that really plays into how does the cloud really work, and understanding that's actually quite different than the traditional on-prem structures. So that, one of the challenges you get into is that you'll get narrow applications that are looking at, say, an Android-specific data gathering application, but then getting that data from the cloud back into an on-prem solution, and then working with that could actually be a huge roadblock. So you have to really step back, try to think, how do you want to architect this thing that's going to get you from A to Z? And it may be something that takes 3-4 years to happen. But if you think it through up front, And then you can figure, well, where do I get the biggest bang? How do I make that work, but still stay in context of where this thing needs to go? So, it's
Great input. Great input. And with that, what we're really saying is cloud is not an application decision that you just, yeah, I want to buy that, and you turn it on, but you really got to think about where you're headed and be a little more strategic than maybe we were in the past, where we just had a server sitting in our office and we could buy an app and turn it on and deploy it to our existing employees.
yeah, just to add to that, I think I'm part of a technology advisory group in the construction industry, and it's interesting within the construction industry, they're very cloud, they're quick to go to cloud. And what you end up, what I see there is you end up with a tremendous amount of fragmentation. You've got cloud app, cloud app, cloud app, cloud app. None of them talk to each other, and none of them talk to the back end. And so their problem is they've been able to achieve advantage out of these individual apps, but now they've sort of created a big problem that they can't talk to each other, so they're manually moving data back and forth to try to get this thing come together. And so now they're having to say, well, how do I make this work? And that's a challenge.
Yeah. Okay, question number 5. How can a CIO or an operations manager work to create consistency to really leverage the cloud and mobile computing? And with that, why don't we start with Bruce?
I think when I think of that and I think of implementation using, from the back-end systems, the CIO a lot of times has a focus on the back-end systems and the actual technology. When I think about implementations I've been a part of in the past, the ones that were less successful were ones that were done in those vacuums where you had IT making certain decisions based on operating systems and corporate compliance and so forth, but without taking into consideration how that needed to be deployed in the actual operation. So to be successful, I think, whether it's cloud-based or any based, you have to do a little bit of internal VOC, or voice of customer, and the operations team has to be involved in that. So the CIO or the IT staff has to engage with the operations staff, because it's inevitably the operations staff that has to go out and implement that, make it successful out in the operation, train the employees, be the first line of troubleshooting and so forth. So when those are done not in conjunction with each other, they tend to not be as successful. They need to be done in conjunction with each other, because there's an old saying that if the technology is neat, it's the wow factor, but if I just take the technology and I apply it to bad processes that exist and don't do that in congruence, then all I've done is create an expensive bad process. So it has to be a synergy between operations and IT to be successful.
Yeah, totally agree. Chris, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely, actually, with what Bruce is saying there. I think the biggest challenge that we see is bad process trying to be applied to a new situation. And the tragedy there is, then what you forget is that the process that you have today are built around your existing systems. So when you put in a new system that may be dramatically better, if you put in the same process, you're clearly not going to get the advantage of that new system. So that's a pretty tragedy in and of itself. But also, actually, it takes a tremendous amount of work for the people that actually run the business on the day-to-day to shift to a new way of doing it. And it's we talk about aversion to change. The reality is that I'm very comfortable with change personally, because that's how my mind is wired. The people that are running the business and are actually bringing the money to the bottom line that's not their thing in the same way. And if you lose sight of that, you're putting them through a lot of pain with no benefit after the fact. So I think that focus on, let's rethink the process to align with what are you actually trying to accomplish, and putting that in place. Yes, it'll still be change, but at least after 4, 5, 6 weeks of it, you've now actually created a better state, as opposed to you've sort of fudged in a new system, but you haven't really rethought it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Martin, any?
Well, I'll just add, when I think about this, I think about, every system today lives on forever. It's not like it was 10 years ago where you built a system, and you basically parked it and maybe maintain it over time. But every system there lives on ever, software as a solution, platform as a solution. So I think you have to focus on managing the systems. And we think about the Android device out in the field. Today we use MDM tools to do that. You think about managing a cloud platform. We as a company, we tend to utilize Microsoft Azure, but Amazon works as well. But even with that, we need someone to manage that process. And I'll even say for us, we utilize NetSuite as a ERM. Even within that platform, there needs to be management of it. So, I think as CIOs and IT directors think about deploying these solutions, you really have to factor in the management of those systems and making sure there's consistency in terms of what's being deployed, in terms of how it's being used. And so, what you want to get away from is the fragmentation of different apps and different versions out there in the field when it comes to the Android devices. And on the cloud side, just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you never have to touch it, right? So there's consistently having to touch and manage these things. So I think certainly as you think about rolling these things out, there need to be management from point A all the way to point B.
Yeah, I think key message here is you can't do it in silos. You've got to bring your organization together. Operations, IT, finance, all have to be represented in order to get the best bang for your buck. Which leads us to the next question. And after you guys have been giving us all this information, it seems like there's a lot to know. How can a mid-sized company do this by themselves, or can they? I get the feeling that if I don't got a ton of resources, I'm not going to be able to do any of this, and I'm paralyzed. So do companies have to do this by themselves? And I'm sure the answer is no, but you guys will tell us why. Let's start with Martin.
Well, that's an easy one, right? That's like a layup. So, can you do it by yourself? The answer is yes, you can do it by yourself. Should you do it by yourself? Well, it depends, right? So, I'll start by using Barcode as an example. 5 years ago, we had our internal IT department and we managed our IT ourselves. 5 years ago, we made a shift. We started outsourcing IT, which gave us the ability to actually take the same resources and focus on things that we can do better as a company. Also, what we gain from outsourcing IT is that we gain their knowledge, it's economies of scale, right? So you have someone that's doing it every single day. Why not utilize that particular company, that particular partner? So in short, I believe that what you want to look for is a partner that has experience, that has been there before. And certainly cost is always a factor, but there's also more to gain sometimes than just the hard dollars, right? So you may actually think you're spending more by outsourcing or partnering up with a company, but in the long term, you actually may be saving yourself a lot more than you're actually spending up front.
Bruce, you're nodding your head yes?
Well, I totally agree. I think that it depends on the company and the size of the company a lot of times as well. The very large companies a lot of times have large IT staffs, and they can dedicate certain parts of those staffs to supporting finance or supporting HR or supporting their distribution operations. But the small to medium business, a lot of those IT staffs wear multiple hats. They're supporting all those processes within the organization. So they especially need expertise from the outside to do that, whether it's folks like Chris that have organizations that can come in and help run the whole project for them, people like Barcoding that can come in with their expertise and partner with them from start to finish. I think that you need to look internally and say, what's the risk of not utilizing available resources? Am I going to delay the project? Am I going to run into situations that I'm not familiar with where that expertise exists in other organizations to be able to utilize?
Right. And Chris?
Obviously, I agree with what was said. I guess I would add, though, that it really comes down to understanding what are the skills and experience that are needed to go down these paths when you're rethinking your systems or whatever flavor that is. It's a different skill set than most mid-market companies carry because it doesn't make sense for them to carry those skill sets. if they were in the business of technology, then they wouldn't be in the business that they're in, right?
Right.
So they're not going to have 2, 3, 4 people with 10, 20 years of experience in new systems. The other challenge, and that gets into the sort of the how do we execute and go through this process and the project management side of it, and just hear the experience in sort of wading through the morass of options out there. The other real challenge, and I look at where we are right now in the technology shift, is that we are in such a big shift in the technology that so many things that you knew internally are actually not necessarily true anymore. So the systems that you're using today are, if you selected them 10 years ago, many of them are what I consider completely dead systems. But you have to kind of understand what's really going on in the technology and why, if I'm making a change right now, I need to select the systems that are still going to be viable, high-growth systems, evolving systems in 5 years. And it's amazing. I'm doing this with a large third-party logistics provider right now, and we've looked at 20 systems, and we've honed it down to, we're down to 2 that we think actually fit, that we could actually say, honestly, in 5 years, will still be systems that people are buying and are evolving rapidly and are part of the future state. And that's a staggering number. There are so many systems on that list that have been around for 30 years, and we're looking at them, and you look at sort of where they are in the continuum, and you're like, well, it's just not going to happen unless they make a dramatic change and they get a whole lot of private equity money in there. They're not going to be able to keep up. So it's a particularly difficult time to understand what to do because these changes are dramatic, and it's not just on the ERP, it's in all the different cloud aspects, it's on what's happening with the mobile and Android devices and the applications all there. It's just a dizzying array of things to try to keep track of, and so I think you're going to end up needing guidance. It's just you don't have a lot of choices.
No, and I think for the most part, I'm sure most of the audience agrees as well. Companies are in place to do what they do well, and they can't do everything. And we've really, over the last 30 years that I've been involved in this industry, we've really begun to evolve to an outsourced model of those things that you don't do well and you don't want to invest in. And yeah, it might be financially a little more expensive on an hourly basis to hire out, support contract kind of some folks, but what they know will save you money. They'll be able to get up to speed much faster, and probably more importantly than anything is there's much lower risk because you don't know what you don't know, and that is, opportunity for disaster, let's say. Okay, so question number 7, let's talk security. Do we need to be concerned about cybersecurity for the cloud or mobile? As everything's moving to the cloud and it's in AWS or Azure, do I need to worry as a customer of that? Martin?
So the short answer is yes. So cybersecurity, right? So what is cybersecurity, right? So cybersecurity probably means different things to different people, but basically, it's a practice where you're protecting your system, your devices, your cloud against, digital attacks, right? So if you look at it in that fashion, then certainly the Android devices, that's a window, right? That's a window into your system. The cloud, that's a big garage door into your system, right? So certainly cybersecurity is real. We have seen it over the last few years. Actually, I think I read an article where cyber attacks are up 40% on Android devices. So certainly security should be always on your mind. We are being attacked on a daily basis, and some of the attacks are intentional. Some are just from things that people happen to discover while using the system. But as an industry, this is something that's very important to us. This is something we have to take seriously. The fact that we are moving our systems to the cloud certainly exposes us. I'm sure Chris can talk more about that. But the Android devices themselves also are a way into those systems. So certainly.
And Chris?
Yeah, so obviously security is a concern. I'm of the opinion that I would rather buy it than make it. So when I look at the cloud, what oftentimes we're doing is saying, well, if I'm going to do X in the cloud, then you need to have the security, certifications, all the different letters and acronyms, so I can sort of pay for that, rent that secure state. But you have to look at it systemically. You have to go across the board with what you're doing and put together all the component parts so that it's actually secure as a whole. So you can have each individual piece be secure or have security. Nothing is unbreachable, but at least you can be paying for all, or using those systems where all this private equity money is going into, where they're pouring millions and millions of dollars into being secure, and you can rent that level of security, but you still have to tie it together into a coherent whole. So I think it's it's certainly a challenge, but I think you also have to take a sort of a grain of salt with cybersecurity. You read the magazines, and I think at some point you have to look at, well, what is the data? What is the cost of a loss of that data, or the cost of a stoppage in performance, and make decisions that reflect the reality of that. Not all data needs to be secure because it's not necessarily useful data. What's probably a bigger challenge is loss of ability to operate. So I have another client where their provider had a breach, and they were unable to function for 8 days. Okay, well, that's a huge problem, and that's the kind of concern that you have to look at and evaluate each of your different solutions and providers against, because that's what's going to impact the business.
Really, really good point. Okay, so we're down to our last question, and I think we got like 8 minutes. So any final thoughts, words of wisdom on folks that are just looking to get into cloud or get into Android? Martin?
So, I was listening to Amita speak earlier today, and one of the things that got my attention, she talked about, failing and not being afraid to fail, right? And you can't succeed without failing a number of times. And probably for me, too many times I see decisions are not made because someone in an executive position, the CIO, the CTO, maybe even finances, they choose not to make a decision because they're afraid of failing. And I think, my advice would be to certainly not jump all in, but give it some thought, analyze the situation, and really commit to it. Things are changing quickly. We sit here today and we get excited about what we have, but if we look into the future and we see quantum computing and we see what's coming with AI, which we think we have AI today, but in 2 years, 3 years from now, it's a different AI we're talking about, right? So this is not a time to sit back and do nothing, right? So my advice would be to make decisions, don't be afraid to fail, manage your failures, and just start moving forward.
And Bruce?
I fully agree, but I also look at things more from a user standpoint, and I think that we're at a great point in time where our user community is changing. We have a younger, more tech-savvy workforce that's entering into the labor pool, and now is a great time for change management. So it's, pun intended, the sky is sort of the limit with what we can do. And if you think of basic barcoding and data capture, I think going forward, you're going to see more things that take up or penetrate into that natural human interface. So if you think of barcoding and taking and doing this, it's a conscious reaction, and a conscious movement. But if you think of things like, seeing, vision, and voice, and speech, and hearing, those types of things, those are natural human interfaces that come very easily to people. And with the younger, more tech-savvy workforce, when they've been doing gaming and things like that, all that technology can be blended. So you can combine scanning with voice and vision and utilize those things to actually create the scan. And I think that we're going to be moving into some of those types of technologies in the future when you got, we talked about AI and letting, machine learning, letting systems make autonomous decisions going forward, so there's not as much human intervention, but also AR and VR and things like that that'll really open up the door to advance some of these technologies and actually be useful out in DC operations or in transportation delivery type operations as well.
Very cool. And Chris, final thoughts?
Yes, I think I agree with both statements. I mean, we've got a dramatic changes in technology and big opportunities there. We've got a young workforce that's very adept in technology. I guess the third component that I think is one of the biggest challenges is that most of your management teams lived through 2008, and they're still carrying a really big hangover from 2008. And so looking at making these big shifts, it's a lot of hesitancy I see in the C-suite. There's just a tremendous amount of fear that these changes could cause a huge problem. The flip side of that is, in a lot of industries, I think the Uber effect is there. It's not if it's going to happen, it's simply who's going to come in and outcompete you because they're going to apply these technologies and get a substantial gain in efficiency or effectiveness that you're not able to do, or you're lagging 2 or 3 years behind. So it's a very interesting time. It's a time where the people that are able to have the vision and actually execute on it are going to probably in 5 years be light years ahead, and there's a whole lot of people that are probably going to be really struggling or out of business in 5 years, and we'll see what happens.
And what I heard from that was, if you don't make a decision, that is making a decision. So don't ignore anything. Okay, with that, I think we got like 2 minutes we can take like 2 questions. Anybody in the audience have questions for the panel? Questions? Mr. Kisloff.
So, in general, there's some very common factors for people migrating to the cloud in terms of reducing capital costs and so forth. But particularly in the space of mobile wireless data collection, do you see any sort of commonality or unique factors that businesses are looking at when they're developing justification of ROI?
Yes. So when I look at mobile, in a lot of industries, I'll use an example in the field service industry. So one of my clients is they're a fork truck dealer, and they have a 100-person field service group. The ROI on a 10% improvement in efficiency for that group, which isn't hard when you look at all the manual things they do, that drops $500,000 to the bottom line, and a year. And that's not even trying hard. So yeah, the return on it can be tremendous. Now, the challenge is to make that work, your actual back-end system needs to handle and interface with that field service system. So that's the conversation that I'm often having on that front. Field service is one example, but many different similar examples. The biggest challenge I see on mobile is that you've got these standalone apps that aren't coming back, and there's a whole manual interface going on there. If you can eliminate that, then you really create tremendous efficiencies.
Nice. Any other questions?
You had mentioned about construction companies going out trying individual cloud solutions and unable to integrate the kind of challenge. Did they finally end up integrating some cloud support, or how do they approach the entire cloud?
It's an evolving space. I mean, I find it's also so if I've got what I'm finding in sort of the smaller construction companies, say 100-person, 150-person, they're very fragmented. You get to some of the larger ones, and they've thrown money at it, and they're in a lot better shape. But it's really all over the place.
And I just want to add that I think that goes back to the first point I was trying to make about interoperability. I mean, the systems today, the newer systems are being built with those hooks already, right? Where I don't know of a new cloud system that's in place, or a successful one, that doesn't allow for incoming data points or outgoing data points. So I think maybe those systems need to evolve, right, into the newer version of the web, and not just hold on to the data. So I think with the newer cloud systems, certainly I think just about all of them allow for exchange and utilization of data.
Right. Yeah. Great. Well, Honeywell has a drawing to do. So if you guys want to come up and pull the business cards, somebody's going to win a prize.
Yeah, so anybody needs to drop a business card in, they just gotta do a quick little drawing
Yeah,
here.
mix those up now, because
Gonna let my
Bob wanted to
Honeywell
put his on
friend
top.
Bruce on in there and draw for me.
Sure, so 99 people can hate me. Parto, I'm not even going to try. Mazgiani? Maryland Port Administration?
Not in here, you have to be present to win.
Ooh,
Somebody sneak
We're
out?
gonna take that photo. One more. Let's try one more.
Carl Conti.
Carl, yay, all right, thank
All right.
you. We'll get you your back.
all right. So with that, I'd like to thank our panel. Hope you guys got some good information you can take home with you, and appreciate you showing up for this presentation.
Thank you.